You're listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lots. It's Friday the 5th of May, 2023, and episode 17 of The Observing Eye. I'm happy I've kept this going. It was a little project I thought I'd give a go of, getting consistent in producing content. And so far, we've only missed 1 week, as in there's been a gap of 2 weeks instead of one between. So that's a success for me. I'm taking that. Anyway, welcome aboard. Welcome back. Hello. Usual things. If you're familiar with this podcast, then you'll know that I like to begin by just taking a brief moment of reflection. So we're going to take just a moment to think about the good things that have happened in our lives this week. Let's express some gratitude. And now let's reflect upon the not so good. As always, each week there's a theme, a topic that I like to try and cover in around about 10 minutes or so. And this week's theme is failure. That's right, failure. We all do it. It happens. We all make mistakes. We're human beings. That's the beauty of the experience, is to fail. But there's a really ominous and unhelpful way that many of us, myself included historically, handle failure. It can be a really uncomfortable thing, can't it? You know, I certainly know what it's like. The whole internal narrative that goes on around making mistakes, and I'd like to first talk about some of the reasons behind why many of us find failure challenging, and then afterwards, I'm going to try and give you some of my thoughts and ideas around managing that going forward, so we can better handle failure and we can try and turn it into something positive rather than a soul-crushing experience. Okay. So, fear of failure. What causes it? Why are we afraid of failure? There's a reason. We're not born terrified of failing. It's something that happens to us over time. We're conditioned into it. And that's the first thing I'm going to talk about, social conditioning. I have to be really careful at this point not to enter rant territory, because I have some thoughts around this that could go for some miles. So as I said, we're born into this world, or born out of this world, I should say, as carefree, creative, thinking creatures, self-aware and perceptive of the universe. And over time, that slowly gets beaten out of us by various factors, beginning primarily, in my opinion, I have to caveat, with the education system. You know, there's a lot of pressure on us to do well, and a lot of self-worth associated with success. You know, we're a good student if we do well, and we're a bad student if we fail. So we're attaching good and bad to the person, not to the behavior, which is something I could talk about in another podcast, actually, attaching to behaviors rather than people, to individuals and identities. So that's pretty crappy, isn't it? So we start in education, then we go to work, and then we have things like performance reviews, and we are told, you know, if you can meet these targets, then you're a good employee and you get rewarded. And if you don't meet these targets, then you need to improve. But it always feels like there's things that we have to improve constantly. No matter how many reviews we have, we never get to a point where we are just enough. There's always things to improve, things to constantly get better at. And yeah, I get it. You know, self-improvement is a constant journey. But it's like we never meet the goals. We can never meet the end point with some of this stuff. And maybe I'm saying that from a certain sense of bias, because, you know, I'm not a fan of that kind of ideology around the way that performance reviews work at present. But again, that's a big tangent. I don't want to go into that in too much detail. So conditioned by the world around us to be successful. And of course, there's other things. There's social pressures. There's, advertising and marketing and all the other crap that influences us. So we have to, just be mindful of where some of these uncomfortable ideas around failure do actually come from. There's the old enemy of mine, which is perfectionism, and that's just essentially holding unrealistic expectations, and that's a real internal thing, and it's a pretty toxic mindset, according to my opinion. Anyway, we really need to think about some of those expectations that we set, but I'll cover that. I'll cover that shortly. Bear with me. And we've got the old fear of the unknown. What happens when we fail? If we have an ideology where success leads to point A, and we don't necessarily consider, well, if we don't get to point A, what else is there? We can become very focused and blinded and blinkered on the achievement of success. If we fail, if the rug is pulled from under us, we're left adrift in unknown territory, and that can be pretty paralyzing for some. Now, alongside all of these conditions that make us afraid of failure, we've got the old internal narrative. Now, we all know what that is. That's the little voice that constantly runs, narrating our existence. And I think the personal narrative can be a really dangerous factor when it comes to failure, because we have the whole triggering conditions that cause us to feel bad when we fail, or to feel fear and uncertainty. And that then feeds into the narrator, who decides to admonish and chastise us for these failings. So we need to think about the internal narrative and how we manage that, how we reframe it, essentially. Get a better narrator is going to be some of my advice on that. And then we have the whole thing around, I'm never going to succeed. And we have the concern that other people are going to judge us because we fail. How will we be perceived by others? It's a whole shit show bag, this failure thing. It really is. So there's that as well. How are we perceived by others? There's that concern that can come into the equation. So let's have a think now. How can we change that? How can we better our perspective and our narrative? So for me, what works really well is reframing the nature of failure. So rather than seeing failure as this apocalyptic cataclysm of, just personal defeat, I like to see failure as a flag that we can use to assess what went wrong. So it becomes like a feedback tool. Something went wrong. Okay, how did it go wrong? What were the conditions for the failure? And what can I take from that to try and improve my behavior, attitude, actions, responses in the future? So let's reframe failure not as a cataclysm, but as a tool that we can apply for personal growth. There's a hell of a lot that we can learn when we become reflective of failure and we sort of step back and be a little bit more pragmatic around it. And as always, I know this is a hell of a lot easier said than done, particularly when those emotions kick in, and we all know how powerful emotions can be. So it's something that we have to practice and takes time, and we have to get better at. It's looking into the mirror of that failure and going, right, what the hell went wrong? And just taking some notes and some time to reflect upon it. I talk about self-awareness a lot, and this is where self-awareness is key. It's something we can really apply it to in observing our failures in a detached manner to understand what went wrong and how we can better it in future. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of how we can emotionally handle failure better is here it comes. Are you ready for it? Compassion. Yes, compassion. I say it a lot, but it's really fucking important. So start doing it. Self-compassion is key. We've really got to be kind to ourselves, generally, I think. I've said this before, but it terrifies me when I'm working with clients and I hear them tell me about their internal narrative, the way that they speak to themselves. It's terrifying. You wouldn't speak to anybody like this, but you're happy speaking to yourself like it. You know, if you went and spoke to someone in public, the way that you speak to yourself, they'd just punch you for it. But yet we're quite happy to put up with treating ourselves like shit and not thinking that there's something wrong with that. So let's think about our internal narratives and how we speak to ourselves. This is what I said before. Hire a better narrator if they're treating you like shit. We've got the capacity to do it. And again, easier said than done. But if you've got Gordon Ramsay as your personal narrator screaming into your ear about how the water is burnt and there's so much oil on this salad that America's going to fucking invade it, get a better one. You know, maybe Deepak Chopra or, I don't know, Jay Shetty. That's your narrator. Someone's going to build you up and not crush you. And narrators often inherit the voices of people who have admonished us in the past as well. They don't necessarily come from us, these ideas. They are inherited by people that have told us that we're shit and we're not good enough and that this we're not going to get anywhere. And that's not any fault of their own, but that's what can happen. And it doesn't necessarily have to be as upfront and obvious as someone saying, "You're shit, mate." It can just be something that we infer because we might be emotionally sensitive and we take something on board in a lot heavier way with a lot more gravitas than other people might. You know, we have to take that into account as well. So what tools can we use to handle failure then? I'm going to, as I always do, lean heavily on the Stoics because I do love a bit of Stoicism. And I think they've got some really important things to say around managing the self, managing our perceptions and perspectives. So there's a modern Stoic philosopher called Ryan Holiday, who you may well have come across. He does a podcast called The Daily Stoic, which is really interesting, actually. And it's a couple of minutes a day where he talks around a certain aspect or quote or something from Stoicism. So go and give that a listen if you haven't heard it already. Now, he's written a couple of books, one of which being The Obstacle is the Way. And in this book, he talks about embracing the obstacle. He's essentially iterating exactly what I said earlier, where we treat obstacles and failures as opportunities to grow and learn and adapt our thinking or behaviors. So think about that. The obstacle is the way. Don't run from the obstacle, go straight at it and work out what the hell's going on. Because a lot of the time, the obstacle can be the thing that we need to learn. We are averse to obstacles because they're difficult and challenging and they don't make us feel good. But we can learn a hell of a lot about ourselves from these obstacles, from challenging these failures. So it can be a real opportunity for personal growth and understanding. The other thing that Stoics talk about a lot is focusing on what we can control. And I've said this a lot as well. So apologies to those of you who've been here before, and I'm just repeating myself, but it's an important lesson, so let's let it sink in. The only thing that we fundamentally have control over in this universe is ourselves, our responses and reactions and thinking. That's all we got. The only thing we can 100% control is ourselves. So what we can control is our perspective when failure hits us. And instead of our perspective being, I'm shit, I can't get anything done, I always fail, you know, this is just typical me, my life is a fucking abomination. That's a perspective, and that's a perspective that we have a choice over. And I know there's some of you out there going, you don't have a choice about how you think. Like it's not that easy to just change your mind about this stuff. It's not easy. It really isn't fucking easy at all. It takes work and it takes effort to do this stuff. And it takes a lot of practice and self-awareness to even see it in the first place. But when we realize that we have the capacity to change our perspective, to choose how we think about something, to decide how we approach the negative things, the failures in life, then it can completely turn on its head how we react and respond to failure. The last tool I'm going to give you from the Stoics is a visualization exercise. And it seems kind of counterintuitive to what we're used to when we talk about visualization. You know, normally we're visualizing a calm sea or a field of lavenders, something to sort of bring us some serenity. But Stoics believe that we can practice negative visualizations. So we can visualize potential failures and setbacks. We can mentally prepare ourselves for these sort of challenges and what might potentially happen. And by simulating the experience of the failure, by thinking about, okay, so what could go wrong? What could be the outcomes of failure? What could happen? And how would I manage that? It enables us to become more resilient because we've already internally analyzed and looked at the issue. And we've already got some ideas about how to handle the failure before it's even happened. It might not even happen, but we've prepared ourselves for it. We're ready for it. We've got an exit strategy for when failure comes along. And that is all I have to say on the subject of failure this week. As always, thank you for spending some time with me. It's appreciated greatly, and I hope that some of this is in some way useful. If you're in the UK, have a wonderful bank holiday weekend. We've got a bonus one because there's a king getting crowned or something. I don't know. I don't really follow the news. So go and enjoy that. Have a wonderful 3 days. If you're not in the UK and you don't have a bank holiday, then have a wonderful 2 days. Think about how you can reframe your perspective a little bit, maybe. Or just enjoy it. Go and have some fun. Fun's important. We've got to let our hair down every once in a while, right? Otherwise, why do we do this? What is the purpose of existence if there is no joy? So get out there and embrace the present moment. Much love, everybody. And I'll catch you soon.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope that you found it useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writings or work around psychology and philosophy and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.substack.com. And that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll see you soon.